as well as some background on the
So this
history
guy,
of the fish build.
wait. Let's watch a bigger video, because this is the first time. This guy's making videos where he's acting that real life is an MMO or something, I guess? What's like his most viewed? Are humans overpowered?
This episode was sponsored by Skillshare.
It's only 8. He acts like humans are in an MMO.
Human beings. Are they as overpowered as the game's community would lead you to believe? Short answer, yeah. They're the most meta-defining build of all time, and the undisputed top build in the current expansion. But believe it or not, this wasn't always the case. Humans used to get bodied left and right on a daily basis by other players. And it took a pretty long time before the player base...
Dude, you know, I have this weird theory that we all live in a simulation. This might be a joke, but what if we actually are just
learned
a game?
How to actually make use of the human build's unique abilities. The story of the humans' rise to dominance is a really interesting one. And so today, we're going to do an in-depth look at the humans' abilities, their strengths, and their weaknesses. Because yes, they do have weaknesses. We'll also go over notable matchups, and finally look at the steps human players took in order to reach their dominant status. First, their unique abilities. I touched on this topic in my video about primates, but I'll recap here and also go into more detail. First off the bat, we have their
Great
ability
graphics,
to throw
shitty
things.
story.
Other builds can throw things,
romance in the game,
but humans can do so harder, faster, and further than anyone else. The reason for this is their body structure. Bipedal builds are tough to balance, both in the game development sense and the center of mass sense. Throwing an item with any real force behind it requires serious balance,
Holy
achieved
shit.
only by having shorter arms and longer legs. This is why humans can launch projectiles at deadly speeds, whereas other primates kinda just lob things without putting much effort into it. If they tried to, they would knock themselves over. Even if chimpanzees could figure out how to craft a spear, there's no way they could throw it hard enough to deal any significant damage. Next, their stamina regeneration. Humans can chase down anything. If you try to run from a human, you might outspeed them initially, but you'll run out of stamina much sooner than they will.
Humans have
and they'll
amazing
catch
stamina
up to
if
you
you
while
think
you're in
about
your
it.
weakened state.
As long as we have
This is
food and water
partially
and
because of their
cover, we
superior
can go for
balance
days,
again,
man.
but mostly it's because of the human build's unique choice to not spec into fur. This gives them access to the extremely broken ability Sweat. Every other current build that's decent at distance running recharges stamina by using the move Pant. This works great, but it does require the user to stop running. Sweat, on the other hand, works better while moving, massively extending the distance a human player can run. They've got a few other important abilities that are essential to their kit, but aren't unique to humans.
Low stealth and low
Their
death.
ability to speak is unique among mammals, but some birds can pull it off too. In humans, the ability to speak allows them to use one of their signature moves, Teach, which drastically boosts skill point gain, mitigating the main penalty a player receives upon getting a game over.
Damn.
Humans and birds also share another unique trait, which is being able to stand upright. Standing upright is extremely useful for dealing with stealth builds that might normally be using tall grass to hide. Tool use also might be thought of as a human-exclusive move, and it certainly is the most effective in humans, but it turns out a pretty
sweat
wide
update
array of other
introduced a new
builds can
meta?
also do it. Birds, primates, cephalopods, and even fish can use tools on occasion, but sweating and throwing, uniquely human. Now onto their weaknesses.
This
And
makes me want
yes,
to play World
it's
of
true
Warcraft.
that currently most human
Like
players
everything
can
else in there.
subvert these with their crafting skill. But it's important to recognize that without equipment, the human build isn't necessarily unstoppable.
You need gear.
The decision to not have fur
Without
granted
gear, you
humans
kinda
a
fuck.
massive buff to mobility at the cost of stealth.
Yeah.
In the mammal faction, fur is a prerequisite to all the major stealth abilities like camouflage, and lack of stealth abilities means getting in close on their targets
What a
is a
great
serious
idea to make
challenge.
videos like this.
The human build's lack of fur also means they have very low
Very, very
defense,
clever.
both from physical attacks and from environmental effects. Bare skin offers almost zero armor, to the point where even players
Obviously,
from lower
that's
weight
China.
classes
Jesus.
have no trouble dealing damage to humans.
Fucking
And bare
Shino
skin also
Abu
takes
Dhabi.
quite a bit of damage from the sun, too. Humans
Yeah, I
are
know.
also pretty limited when it comes to the power stat. Physically, they're the weakest of the great apes, and don't really have any good options for dealing damage. They lack the classic high damage bite attack that nearly every
That
other
was like a
non-herbivorous
nutso.
build relies on,
Jeez.
instead having to resort to blunt attacks like punch and kick, which we all know aren't very effective against builds that have thick fur or skin. The last major weakness I can see is that they're pretty bad at dealing with stealth. The lack of night vision means darkness can really
Shit,
hamper
that's
their
scary.
ability to
Oh
locate
my god,
targets.
fuck.
And their lack of a strong sense of smell means camouflage is especially useful against them. Okay, now let's talk about matchups. Obviously, a key feature of the human build is being able to craft equipment.
The gear,
Given
the gear.
basic equipment like low-level
A
armor
fully
and
geared
hunting
human
gear,
mostly wins.
the
Yeah,
human's
always
best
wins.
matchup is going to be medium-large mammals.
But humans are also weak against
Unlike
like
blunt damage,
viruses and shit.
piercing damage is quite effective versus builds with
Look
thick
at the CGI,
hide.
man.
But on defense, they're actually pretty awful. A human's only option on defense against a large mammal is intimidation, unless they've got some crazy high-level equipment. But I'll make a video on power creep later. The classic human equipment cannot stop a charging tank main unless the intimidate attempt works.
Tank main.
But overall, this matchup is one of the reasons humans became top tier. Hardly any builds have favorable matchups against tanks. But that's not to say humans don't have their counters though.
We got
As
the
I
end
said
game?
before, stealth can be really effective against them due to their lack of a keen sense of smell and night vision. Humans have the ability to win pretty much any fight as long as they've got time to prepare. But taken by surprise, humans have a lot fewer options. Another thing humans have
Holy
trouble
shit.
dealing with is flight.
God
Even when a
damn.
human has a ranged weapon, players with high aerial mobility are pretty safe during flight. Now, as far as I know, there aren't any bird builds powerful enough to one-shot humans, which is important because blunt attacks like punches are actually quite effective against birds. Birds have hollow bones that are resistant to tension and torsion.
Birds have hollow
but not
bones? I never
compression.
knew that.
This is the opposite of mammal bones, which are resistant to compression and tension, but not torsion. The point is, birds aren't the best choice against humans, but flight has been unlocked by 4 different classes in the game. Birds, which we just discussed, aren't a good choice. Bats, which do even less damage than birds. Reptiles, which unfortunately had their aerial builds banned in patch 1.3.1. And insects. Flying eusocial insects have by far the best matchup versus humans in the entire game.
Mosquitoes and shit.
Humans have 0 counterplay against a swarm of stinging insects. I mean, sure, there are special items that they can use to combat swarms if they're prepared. But the amount of human
really
mains who've
equipment,
chosen that as
based.
one of their
We're
prestige
pretty much like
abilities
warriors.
is pretty small. Humans' lack of fur means they have no innate defense against stings. Stings also have the chance to proc the anaphylaxis debuff,
Oh, don't show
which
that.
can actually lead to a game over.
That is I
It's for
cried
this
like a
reason
bitch.
that the high score for
That
human
was called My
eliminations
Girl, right?
belongs to
The
the
movie's called My
Africanized
Girl
honeybee,
with Dan Aykroyd.
known better by its community-given name, the killer bee.
They killed
And
58
even if the
people
stings
per year.
don't proc the allergic reaction effect, they will still definitely achieve their primary goal of dropping their resolve to 0 and granting you control over the territory. And we can see that lately the viability of killer bees has only been growing now that they've expanded their territory outside
I
of
thought
Africa.
they're dying out.
Which brings me to my main point. Are humans overpowered? Well, just like the Africanized honeybee, humans really only became OP once they escaped the African server and invaded other areas. Notice how humans took down megafauna across every terrestrial server except Africa. The African tank mains have the matchup experience and counterplay options to deal with the vast array of skills humans have access to. But the rest of the community was totally unprepared to deal with the rapid invasion of
African
human
server,
mains
man.
invading their competitive scene. In other words, the devs could have prevented the massive
Life is
destabilization
literally
of
a
the
video
meta
game
if they
for
region locked
that.
humans. Staying competitive in the
Thank you,
meta
Stan.
requires a good player constantly be leveling up their skills. There's no better example of this than the rapid rise to dominance that
I
humans
never watched this
experience.
guy. I know this guy has millions of views. This is a guy who lives in the forest and he's acting like he's doing old shit. And he's
If you'd like to level up your own
views.
skills and unlock new ones, I
Skillshare.
highly recommend Skillshare.
Okay, man, cool channel. I get it. Interesting. Goddamn, watch him. This man is God. I hear that a lot. I hear he's like amazing. 8 million subs is crazy, man.